And to the Rothschilds, a family whose footprint stretches from the foggy alleys of Frankfurt all the way to boardrooms, battlefields, and the corridors of power.
It began, as these things often do, with something that looked insignificant. A single upload. No announcement, no context, no explanation. Just a file, quietly placed, briefly visible, and then almost immediately erased. But not before someone copied it. Not before someone looked inside. And not before a chain reaction began that no one could fully control. At first, the people who saw it didn't understand what they were looking at. It wasn't formatted like a leak. There were no bold claims, no dramatic headlines, no clear narrative guiding the reader toward a conclusion. Instead, it felt fragmented, scattered, pages that didn't seem connected at first glance, old documents, handwritten notes, charts that looked scientific but lacked clear labels. Diagrams appeared incomplete, as if pieces were missing, or perhaps intentionally removed. But there was one thing that stood out immediately: consistency. The names repeated across pages, across decades, across centuries. And not just any names, names quietly tied to influence, wealth, and power. At first, the assumption was obvious: forgery. A carefully constructed illusion meant to blend history with imagination. But the deeper people looked, the harder it became to dismiss. The details were too precise. Dates aligned with real events. Signatures matched archived records. Even the aging of the scanned materials held up under scrutiny. It wasn't perfect, but it was convincing. Then someone noticed the pattern. Not in the names, not in the dates, but in the margins. Small annotations repeated themselves in ways that didn't seem random. Symbols, shorthand markings, coded references that didn't belong to any widely known system. At first, they were ignored, dismissed as personal notes or irrelevant scribbles. But once isolated and compared, they began to form something structured, something deliberate. That's when the tone shifted. Because patterns imply intention, and intention raises questions. Why would anyone maintain records like this? Why preserve fragments across generations, across formats, across languages? And more importantly, why hide it? The file didn't provide answers, but it pointed towards something deeper than simple documentation. It suggested continuity, a thread running quietly through time. As analysts began piecing together the fragments, a new layer emerged. Family trees, not unusual on their own, but mapped with unusual precision. Lines drawn not just to show descent, but alignment. Certain branches emphasized, others faded. It wasn't just about who came from whom. It was about how those connections were maintained, preserved, repeated. At first, the interpretation seemed exaggerated. Powerful families have always intermarried. History is full of alliances built through bloodlines. But this felt different. The repetition wasn't just social. It hinted at selection. Not random, not accidental, but intentional in a way that was difficult to prove and even harder to ignore. And then came the part that unsettled everyone who saw it. Buried deeper in the file, beyond the genealogies and handwritten notes, were structured tables, modern in appearance, clinical, columns filled with unfamiliar codes alongside more recognizable terms, markers, traits, probabilities. It looked like research, not historical observation, but ongoing analysis. That's when skepticism turned into something else. Not belief, not yet, but unease. Because even if the conclusions were unclear, the effort behind it wasn't. This wasn't something assembled quickly. It wasn't a recent creation designed to go viral. It felt accumulated, layered, built over time by multiple hands, each adding to something they fully expected to continue long after they were gone. The question changed. It was no longer, is this real? It became, why would something like this exist at all? Because maintaining records at this scale required purpose, it required discipline, and above all, it required continuity. Something that doesn't happen unless there's a reason strong enough to survive generations. A theory began to form, quietly at first, not spoken loudly, not published in headlines, but exchanged in private discussions between people who understood long-term systems. What if this wasn't about control in the way people assumed? What if it wasn't about dominance or superiority? What if it was about something far more subtle and far more unsettling? Preparation? History, after all, is unpredictable. Empires rise and fall, systems collapse, crises emerge without warning. And those who endure are rarely the ones who simply react. They're the ones who anticipate, the ones who prepare long before the moment arrives. The patterns in the file, if interpreted that way, took on a different meaning. Traits associated with resilience, decision-making under pressure, long-term thinking, not flashy qualities, not the kind that attract attention, but the kind that matter when everything else begins to fail. Of course, none of this was proven. The documents were incomplete, the interpretations varied, and without clear verification, everything remained suspended between possibility and speculation. But sometimes possibility is enough to change perception, enough to make people look at history differently. Because once the idea takes hold, that something could be unfolding quietly beneath the surface across generations, it becomes difficult to dismiss entirely. It lingers. It reshapes the way patterns are seen. It raises questions that don't have easy answers. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the file vanished completely. Links stopped working. Archives were taken down. Discussions were flagged, buried, or erased. But the fragments remained, copied, saved, remembered. Enough to keep the conversation alive, even without the original source. In the end, nothing was confirmed. Nothing was definitively proven. But something had changed. Not in the world itself, but in how people saw it. Because the possibility alone was enough. The suggestion that power might operate on timescales far longer than most people imagine. That influence might not just be maintained, but carefully shaped over generations in ways that are almost invisible. And the most unsettling part wasn't the idea that it could be true. It was the realization that if something like this were real, it wouldn't look dramatic. It wouldn't announce itself. It would look exactly like this, quiet, fragmented, easy to dismiss, until one day it isn't. And once that thought settles in, it refuses to leave. Because the mind begins to connect things it never connected before. Patterns that once felt random start to look arranged. Decisions made decades apart begin to feel strangely aligned. Not identical, not coordinated in any obvious way, but consistent in direction. Like a current moving beneath the surface of events no one questions. That was the effect the file had on those who studied it longest. Not immediate belief, not blind acceptance, but a gradual shift in perspective, quiet discomfort that came from realizing how little anyone truly sees when looking at the bigger picture. Some of the most unsettling details weren't even in the main documents. They were in the gaps. Years missing from records. Entire sections where continuity should have existed, but didn't. At first, those gaps were assumed to be damage, lost data, incomplete scanning. But when mapped out, they followed a pattern of their own. Specific time periods, moments in history when the world experienced disruption, were the same periods where the records went silent. Wars, economic collapses, moments of instability where systems broke down and uncertainty took over. It was as if whatever process these documents represented paused during chaos, or perhaps went underground, and then resumed when stability returned. That raised another question, not just about what was being tracked, but how it adapted. Because if something can survive disruption, adjust, and continue, it's not fragile, it's resilient by design. That idea alone shifted the interpretation again. This wasn't just about preservation. It was about continuity under pressure. The annotations and the margins began to make more sense in that light. Those strange symbols, once thought to be random or decorative, started to align with changes in the data itself. Subtle shifts in emphasis, new branches highlighted, old ones fading, almost like decisions, not emotional decisions, not personal ones, calculated adjustments, as if someone or something was constantly evaluating outcomes and refining the path forward. That's when the conversation took a darker turn. Because if the records reflected adjustment, then they also implied selection. And selection implies criteria, standards, thresholds. But those criteria were never explicitly written. They were inferred, deduced from patterns, and that made them far more difficult to challenge. Some researchers tried to reconstruct the missing logic. They cross-referenced historical events, family timelines, and the appearance of certain traits in later generations. What they found wasn't definitive, but it was enough to deepen the mystery. There were correlations, not perfect ones, not predictable ones, but consistent enough to suggest that something was being monitored over long periods of time. And more importantly, something was being learned. That's when a second anonymous source came forward, not with documents this time, but with context. The message was brief, deliberately vague, but it contained a single line that reframed everything. "You're not looking at a secret," the message said. "You're looking at a process." That distinction mattered. A secret is something hidden, static, waiting to be revealed. A process is something active, ongoing, evolving. And if this was a process, then it hadn't ended. It was still happening, right now. That realization changed the stakes entirely, because it meant this wasn't just about history. It wasn't something that happened in the past and could be safely analyzed from a distance. It was present, embedded in the world as it exists today. And if that were true, then the visible surface of power, the institutions, the systems, the public figures, might only be part of the picture. The rest would be invisible. Not hidden in the traditional sense, not locked away behind doors or buried in vaults, but distributed, spread across time, across people, across decisions that seem unrelated until you step far enough back to see the pattern they create together. That idea is difficult to accept because it challenges something fundamental, the belief that the world operates in a way that can be fully understood if you gather enough information. But what if the information itself is fragmented by design? What if no single piece reveals the truth, but all of them together point towards something that isn't meant to be easily seen? That's what made the file so unsettling. Not what it said directly, but what it implied indirectly. It didn't claim control. It didn't declare superiority. It didn't even explain itself. It simply existed. And in existing, it suggested that something far more complex than people realize might be unfolding quietly, continuously, just out of view. Of course, there were skeptics, plenty of them. They argued that the patterns were being overinterpreted, that humans are wired to find meaning even where none exists, that the entire thing could be an elaborate construction designed to provoke exactly this kind of reaction. And they weren't wrong to question it. But skepticism didn't erase the details, it didn't explain the consistency, and it didn't answer the most persistent question of all. Why? Why maintain something like this across generations? Why invest time, effort, and secrecy into a system that, at first glance, offers no obvious return? Unless the return isn't immediate, unless it's something that only becomes visible over long stretches of time, decades, centuries, long enough that no single person would ever see the full outcome of what they contributed to. That kind of thinking is rare, but not impossible. History has shown that some individuals and some groups are willing to think far beyond their own lifetimes, to build systems that outlast them, to shape outcomes they will never personally witness. And if something like that were happening here, it wouldn't need to be obvious. It wouldn't need to be confirmed. It would only need to continue. Quietly, consistently, uninterrupted. And that brings the story back to where it began. A file that appeared without warning. A glimpse of something incomplete, something ambiguous, something that might be nothing, or might be everything, because the truth is, no one has all the pieces. Not the researchers, not the analysts, not the people who first discovered it. The file is gone. The sources are silent. And whatever process it hinted at, if it exists at all, is still out there, unseen, unverified, and possibly still unfolding. And once that thought sinks in, it begins to twist in your mind. It creeps into your daily perception, making ordinary events feel deliberate, as if every decision, every alliance, every subtle shift in society is part of a rhythm most people aren't meant to notice. Researchers who spent weeks, even months, piecing together fragments of the file reported the same sensation. A nagging awareness that the world is layered, that history is not a straight line, but a web of influences, some visible, others invisible, and some so deeply entrenched that the average observer can't even detect them. Some attempted to trace the lineage of influence more concretely, mapping marriages, financial alliances, and professional connections. It wasn't enough to see just names on a tree. They had to understand movement, timing, and selection, how certain individuals were strategically positioned in business, politics, or academia. Patterns began to emerge, subtle but undeniable, and each connection seemed deliberate, almost engineered. Others focused on the genetic data itself. Columns of codes and annotations hinted at traits that went beyond common hereditary qualities: longevity, resilience under stress, cognitive acuity. Nothing fantastical, nothing magical. But the repetition over centuries suggested a long-term strategy, a plan to preserve characteristics advantageous for survival, adaptability, and influence. Disbelief was common at first. Humans are wired to resist the idea that unseen systems can shape events beyond our control. Yet even the skeptics couldn't ignore the meticulousness of the records. Something was being measured, evaluated, and maintained. And unlike money or titles, these weren't assets easily transferred. They were biological, personal, intimately connected to the essence of life itself. As these realizations spread quietly among experts, anxiety began to take hold. The question wasn't simply, is this real? But if it is real, what does it mean? Because the implications extended far beyond any one family or dynasty. They hinted at an entire methodology for enduring upheaval, a deliberate orchestration of survival, refined over generations. Then came the troubling patterns in history itself. Gaps in the documentation coincided with periods of societal instability, wars, revolutions, financial collapses. During these moments, the records went silent, only to resume with continuity once the chaos had passed. It was as if the process knew when to hide, when to remain dormant, when to act. Some of the most unnerving deductions emerged from the margins of the file. Symbols and shorthand, once dismissed as mere annotations, were reinterpreted as a language of decision-making. Each mark signaled an adjustment, a strategic recalibration in response to external circumstances. Small interventions in human networks, carefully timed actions, long-term planning disguised as ordinary life. The deeper the analysts went, the more it became clear that this wasn't static knowledge. It was dynamic, not a secret to be hoarded, but a living, evolving system. A process that adapts, corrects, and continues even as the world around it shifts unpredictably. Skeptics argued against overreading, warning that humans are naturally pattern-seeking creatures, prone to attributing meaning where none exists. But the patterns persisted across continents, generations, and centuries. Random coincidence could not account for the precision observed. It demanded explanation, an explanation that few could articulate without sounding paranoid. Private discussions among experts began to frame the issue differently. It wasn't simply about the past. If this process existed, it was operating now. Decisions made in the present could be part of the same continuum that had been unfolding for centuries. The power structures visible to the public might be only the surface, while the real orchestration happened quietly, deliberately, and invisibly. That realization created a pervasive unease. The idea that systems could be operating beyond observation challenged fundamental assumptions about society, democracy, and human agency. What if the visible world, the politics, the economics, the conflicts, were shaped not just by chance, but by design at a level most would never perceive? Some researchers tried to reconstruct the missing logic, piecing together historical patterns, genealogical alignments, and potential selection criteria. The results were never conclusive, but they were suggestive. Survival, adaptability, cognitive capability, and influence appeared as recurring threads, traits that individually seemed mundane, but together hinted at a purposeful design to endure disruption, chaos, and change. The conclusion, tentative and uneasy, was clear. This wasn't about supremacy or immediate control. It was about resilience, not in the sense of wealth or fame, but in the sense of enduring the unforeseen, navigating crises, and maintaining continuity in a world defined by uncertainty. And then came the final piece that forced the experts to reconsider everything. One anonymous source, contact untraceable and voice disguised, simply said, "You're not seeing a family, you're seeing a framework." That distinction reframed everything. It wasn't lineage in the traditional sense, it was methodology, a system designed to perpetuate life, traits, and adaptability across generations, refined over centuries, beyond any one person's lifespan. The implications were profound. History is never as straightforward as textbooks suggest. Influence is rarely as transparent as it appears. And sometimes continuity, resilient, adaptive, enduring, is achieved not through force or conquest, but through meticulous observation, selective preservation, and careful, patient orchestration. Yet the final chilling thought lingered. The process, if it exists, is ongoing. It is not bound by historical context or modern scrutiny. It continues quietly, under the radar, guided by principles set centuries ago, and the world, for all its complexity and chaos, may be more shaped by invisible hands than anyone could comfortably acknowledge. All of this circles back to the file, the brief, unassuming upload that started it all. It was a fragment, a glimpse, a hint of something immense and ongoing. And though it disappeared, erased from public view, its impact persists. Its very existence challenges assumptions about randomness, agency, and the passage of time. The truth of the process, the framework, the lineage, it remains out of reach, unconfirmed, invisible. Yet the idea itself reshapes the way the world is perceived. It forces a recognition that power, survival, and continuity may operate on a scale that transcends generations, actions, and even visible influence. And once you understand that possibility, it's impossible to look at the world the same way again. Ordinary events take on new weight. Historical coincidences seem deliberate. Decisions, whether by individuals or institutions, feel connected to something larger, something enduring. Something carefully designed to persist quietly beyond the view of any observer. The file is gone, the sources are silent. And the process, if it truly exists, continues to unfold, unnoticed by most, unconfirmed by any. But its shadow lingers. Its suggestion is enough to leave anyone who glimpses it forever aware that the surface reality may be only part of the story. Because whether it is real, imagined, or somewhere in between, the concept forces a simple, unsettling question. What if continuity, adaptability, and survival are being shaped quietly, deliberately, across centuries? And what if, in that quiet orchestration, the world is being guided by forces most of us will never see, until one day we cannot avoid them? The idea refuses to leave your mind. It seeps into everyday observation, making you notice patterns in politics, economics, and society you might have ignored before. Simple coincidences feel suspiciously consistent. Unrelated events appear linked, and the faint, persistent notion emerges. There is more at work than anyone can fully comprehend. Even without confirmation, even without proof, the implications are impossible to ignore. They challenge everything you know about control, power, and legacy. They suggest that perhaps the most significant influence operates in ways deliberately designed to be invisible, pervasive, patient, and enduring. And once you glimpse that possibility, the world shifts. Nothing is quite as predictable. Nothing is quite as random. Every system, every alignment, every family or institution may be part of a web that stretches beyond comprehension, beyond scrutiny, and beyond time itself. The file may have vanished, the documents may have disappeared, but the awareness it triggered cannot be erased. Once understood, once even imagined, The process, the framework, the continuum becomes a permanent lens through which the world can never be seen the same way again. And in that shift, there is both fascination and unease, a recognition that perhaps history, legacy, and influence are not just human constructs, but carefully managed systems, evolving quietly beneath the surface. Systems we only glimpse in fragments, warnings, and whispers, never the whole truth. Because if the process exists at all, it will outlast curiosity, skepticism, and even the lives of those who discover it. And when it does, it will continue to shape the world quietly, invisibly, relentlessly, until its design reaches a point we may never fully understand.